Why are the LA Kings off for 2 weeks? We'll answer that question and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, a new episode out today, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $150 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on today's show, the LA Kings have lost a player. We'll give you the news on that. Also, we'll give you another scouting report on a potential target for the LA Kings at the upcoming trade deadline. But we start with the Kings not playing for 2 weeks. Now, you may or may not know why. I know we have all kinds of different levels of Kings fans that enjoy this show. Some of you are completely locked into everything going on across the league and what's going on in the NHL. And others of you are just kind of basically into the Kings and maybe some things that relate to the Kings. So I did want to explain why the LA Kings are not playing for the next 2 weeks. And basically, there's a new event called the Four Nations Face-Off. It is taking place instead of the All-Star Game and Skills Competition this year. Why? Well, basically, the All-Star Game and, frankly, most All-Star Games in all sports are kind of getting pretty stale if they haven't gotten stale already. And some of them are even dying off. The Pro Bowl in the NFL doesn't really exist anymore. They don't tackle. They have a flag football game now. The NBA All-Star Game has become kind of a joke where the teams score in the 200s. Baseball's All-Star Game is still kind of okay. It's okay. But the NHL has certainly tried to try different things when it comes to spicing up the All-Star Game. They used to have the traditional East versus West, and then they went to like North America versus the world. And then they've gone to this current format where they've got 4 teams, each made up by the division. It's like a 3-on-3 format. You've got multiple games going on. And I'll be honest, for me, all of it is pretty not interesting anymore for me. I've gone to 2 All-Star games, LA and San Jose, and they are a pretty cool event to go to when you've got all the fan fest stuff going on. And it's interesting to see in person, but watching it on TV, I'm not really into it anymore. And consider myself a pretty hardcore hockey fan. So if I'm not interested, then maybe there's a problem. And that's why the NHL has tried some different things, and they're trying something else different. Also, this is seen as a bit of a preview for the upcoming Winter Olympics, which are next year in Italy. And the NHL is participating in the Winter Olympics. So this is kind of a taste of that when you've got countries playing against each other. Now, one of the big issues with the All-Star Game is not just the fan interest, but player interest. A lot of players aren't all that interested in playing in an All-Star Game. And yes, it's still an honor to be an All-Star, and players might even have incentives in their contract and get paid a little extra money if they're named to an All-Star team. But the games themselves, the level of competition, it's not great. So NHL players, generally have shown, it seems, interest in representing their countries. They want to play in the Olympics. It's been very clear. They voiced that opinion. And I think an event like the Four Nations Face-Off is also something that it seems most of the players are interested in taking part in. So the competition level should be pretty good. Now, maybe not Stanley Cup playoff good, but at least as good as the NHL regular season. And at least that's the hope. And if that is the case, then to me, that is a better event than what an All-Star Game would be. Now, the Four Nations Face-Off is made up of 4 nations: USA, Canada, Sweden, and Finland. And that's also a bit of a problem. Some of the NHL's biggest stars, like the NHL's leading goal scorer right now, Leon Draisaitl, who's from Germany, is not competing in this event. Same goes for NHL superstar Alexander Ovechkin, who's chasing Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal-scoring record. He, of course, is Russian, and right now Russia is not allowed to participate in these types of events because of the war with Ukraine. So great players from Russia, Germany, Switzerland, Czechia, Slovakia are not a part of this event. So while the Four Nations Face-Off is hoping to tap into the idea of playing for and rooting for one's country, not all NHL players and not all global fans are in on the party. The other issue with the Four Nations and other all-star games is the concern over injuries. How do you have a hard-fought competitive game while reducing the risk of players getting hurt and potentially missing out on the upcoming playoffs? Well, you can't. It's a huge risk and something that every team and every fan base is likely worried about. If, God forbid, Adrian Kempe suffers a serious injury playing for Team Sweden in this event, I can assure you that I and every Kings fan will be upset about that and wondering, was this really worth it? While the All-Star games might not be the most competitive games out there, you were at least pretty sure no one was going to get hurt unless there was some kind of a freak accident, because no one's hitting in these events and the competition is kind of going through the motions. So all indications are, though, that the players involved in this event want to win and that it means something to them. And so that means we're probably going to see some hitting and some block shots and the potential for injury. There's also the question of this being in some ways an advantage to teams that don't have players taking part in this event. For example, the Washington Capitals, who are the best team in the Eastern Conference and have the second most points in the NHL, have 0 players competing in this Four Nations faceoff, which is surprising because obviously they've got some pretty good players. On the other end of the spectrum is the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. They have 8 players participating in this event. Obviously, it's 8 of their best players. So hard to imagine that this extra rest wouldn't benefit the Washington Capitals and maybe hurt the Florida Panthers. As for our LA Kings, we have 2 players participating in the event. I mentioned Adrian Kempe for Sweden. He's projected to play on the 3rd line for that team, which tells you how good that forward group is for Sweden. And of course, there's also Drew Doughty, selected on the final day there where the Kings are playing their final game. He's going to play for Team Canada. He's obviously very excited about that. And we've got Kempe and Doughty facing off against each other in the very first game of the Four Nations face-off. That's coming up this Wednesday, 5 p.m. LA time. It is Sweden against Canada. You can check out the game nationally on TNT. Also, ESPN and ABC are broadcasting the games as well, although not that first game. And I'm guessing for you streamers, maybe Hulu and ESPN Plus is where you can find these games. Now, each team will be playing each other once. So 3 games guaranteed for each nation. And from that, they will determine who will meet up in the championship game that'll be played next Thursday. Interesting that the point system for this game is actually a bit different than the NHL regular season. Teams that win in regulation get 3 points, not 2. 2 points go to a team that wins in overtime or a shootout, and a team gets 1 point for losing in overtime or a shootout. Now, some feel like this is something the NHL should maybe go to in the future. Maybe they're testing the waters a little bit on this. But for now, if you don't care about this event at all, and you just want to know when the Kings are back on the ice, well, the NHL regular season will resume next Saturday, and the Kings will be in action next Saturday at home as they will host the Utah Hockey Club. As for me personally, I'm interested in this event. I don't know that I'd go so far as to say I'm excited about it. I do like the Olympics. I think the Olympics are a major event and such a marquee event that gets so much attention that the NHL really does need to be involved in it. I'm glad to see that they are involved in it next year. I'm hoping in this Four Nations face-off that we see a pretty high level of hockey, but I'm also keeping my fingers crossed that no one gets hurt, except for maybe Connor McDavid. I'm kidding. Up next, the LA Kings have lost a player. We'll give you the details on that next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off, you want to get in on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature keeps you in every moment of the game and keeps it exciting, whether I'm backing my team or looking for a late game rally or just picking a player to hit a clutch three. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. The Lakers are hosting the Utah Jazz tonight. Lakers are a 12-point favorite. The over-under is 235, and Luka Doncic might be making his Lakers debut tonight if you want to get in on that. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $150 or can get $150 in a bonus bet if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, we talked about the LA Kings making roster moves recently with the emergency call-up of goalie Phoenix Copley and the situation with Darcy Kemper being away from the team for what's being called personal reasons. No update on that situation, and we continue to hope for the best. The Kings also placed defenseman Mikey Anderson on injured reserve with the anticipation that he will be back and activated off IR once the Kings come back to action after the Four Nations face-off. I talked about how it was an interesting move to call up Copley and not Eric Portillo because Portillo is waiver exempt and could be called up and sent back down to the AHL without having to go through waivers and avoid being claimed by another team potentially. Well, the Kings did have a player claimed off waivers on Monday. It was not Phoenix Copley, but defenseman Andreas Englund, who was claimed by the Nashville Predators. It seems the Preds like to claim Kings off waivers. I believe the last player claimed off of waivers by the Kings was Samuel Fagemo by Nashville, but the Kings were able to eventually reclaim him from the Predators when they placed him on waivers. As for Englund, he was on the Kings roster all season, but rarely played, even with the 11-7 setup that the Kings were using with the extra defenseman. He had only appeared in 7 games all season for the Kings and had 1 goal, and that 1 goal was the only point he had on the season. All in all, Andreas Englund played 93 games for the LA Kings in his career, including all 82 last season. In his Kings career, he posted 2 goals and 9 assists for 11 points. He had 81 penalty minutes and was a guy that was not afraid to drop the gloves, which is where most of his penalty minutes came from. Now, Englund seemed to be a bit of a whipping boy amongst a certain fraction or faction of the Kings fan base, which I never really understood. And don't get me wrong, clearly, based on the numbers I just gave you, he's not a high-level impact defenseman. He's a defensive defenseman that does his job playing on the third pairing. And I completely understand that Andreas Englund is a marginal NHL defenseman. But then again, he's playing on the third pairing, and most of those guys are usually marginal NHL defensemen. Jacob Moverara is a marginal NHL defenseman. Kyle Burrows, who can play that role, is a marginal NHL defenseman. So, losing one of those guys isn't a huge deal, but if you have one of them, it's pretty good. That doesn't make mistakes, that plays a reasonable, respectable game defensively. That's what you're looking for. And I thought Englund did that. I think Jacob Moverara does that. I think Kyle Burrows would do that if he was put in that position. So when you look at losing Andreas Englund, you're not losing a major piece, obviously, but you are losing a guy who's got good size, over 6 feet tall, big in front of the net, could clear out the front of the crease, was a physical player. He'd run you into the boards, and I mentioned he dropped the gloves. They're not getting that with Jacob Moverara. Now, Jacob Moverara has some things that Andreas Englund doesn't have. He's a little bit better of a skater, a little bit better of a puck mover, maybe a little bit better of a passer. But offensively, they're not, neither one of them are going to give you much. And I will say Jacob Moverara, in the past, I maybe haven't been his biggest fan, but I will say he's kind of grown on me a little bit. I think he does have some pluses over Andreas Englund. But there are some things he doesn't do like Englund as well. So all in all, it's not, losing Andreas Englund is not a big loss for the LA Kings. They still have Kyle Burrows, who I mentioned, for depth on defense. They could also call up a guy like a Caleb Jones from the AHL who has NHL experience if for some reason they need another defensive defenseman to call up. So there's that. Now, as to why the Kings decided to put Englund on waivers and not Phoenix Copley is a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm not sure why they decided to do that. And I hope that this isn't some kind of an indication that Phoenix Copley could be out beyond the Four Nations face-off and that they would need Phoenix Copley to be the backup. I don't know about that. It does make me wonder a little bit. Now, eventually, if Darcy Kemper comes back, or I should say Winnie comes back, if everything turns out to be fine with his personal issues, the Kings are eventually going to have to put Phoenix Copley on waivers, send him back down to Ontario, because the Kings obviously are not going to carry 3 goaltenders, and there is the potential that maybe Phoenix Copley could be picked up by another team. We'll have to wait and see. But either way, certainly an interesting move by the LA Kings, and they have lost Andreas Englund. Again, is it a major loss? No, but it hurts their depth a little bit. But will be interesting to see what they decide to do once Darcy Kemper does come back, and once Mikey Anderson is taken off of injured reserve. They will have to make another move, and certainly it appears that Phoenix Copley is going to be the guy who will be sent down, and we'll see how that works out with the Kings, if they're able to keep him or if they will lose him and then have to look for another veteran goalie to be their number 2. In the AHL, again, it seems like this all could have been kind of avoided if they had called up Eric Portillo, but they decided not to do that. We will look at another possible trade target for the LA Kings with the trade deadline coming up. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. You just realized your business needs to hire somebody yesterday, and you can find amazing candidates fast by using Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites, because Indeed's sponsored job posts put your post at the top of the page and help you to reach your right candidates faster. If you have been in that spot where you need to hire right away, the pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback, then you need exactly what Indeed's sponsored job posts can give you. They will make sure that your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now, if you spend, or I should say, if you speed up the hiring process, you will get a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Again, get that $75 sponsored job credit. And you can support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, the NHL trade deadline is now less than a month away, March 7th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And so as we are recording today's show, we are 25 days away from the deadline. In between now and then, we are looking at some potential targets for the LA Kings. Obviously, it appears that the biggest need for the Kings is help in the scoring department, preferably a right-handed shot that could also help out on the power play. So we are focusing on players that not only fit that description, what the Kings are looking for, we believe, but also that are on teams that likely will be looking to move that kind of a player, because that player is potentially an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, or that team could be playing on a team that is clearly a seller at the trade deadline because that team is likely out of a playoff race. So we have talked in the past about Vancouver's right winger Brock Besser. We have talked about Kyle Palmieri, right winger for the New York Islanders, on previous shows. Today, we're going to be looking at Rickard Rakell of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He is a right winger. He is a right shot. Now, he will not be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, but he is likely playing on a team in the Pittsburgh Penguins that are likely looking to be sellers at the deadline. Rickard Rakell is a native of Sweden. He's 31 years old. He's going to be playing for Sweden in the upcoming Four Nations face-off, along with our own Adrian Kempe. Rakell has played in 777 career NHL games with the Ducks and the Penguins. He has scored 226 goals with 271 assists for 497 career points. He's 6'1", 195 pounds, right shot, right winger. He was the 30th overall pick of the Ducks back in the 2011 draft. He has played parts of 13 NHL seasons and has scored 20 or more goals in a season 6 times, including this season. He has also scored 30 or more goals in a season twice and is on pace to do it again this year, looking at hitting the 36 goal mark. At least that's what he's projected to hit this season. 56 games this year in Pittsburgh. He's got 25 goals and 48 points, playing on their top line. He's played 48 career playoff games with 11 goals and 19 points, so he has some playoff experience. His career high in power play goals in a season is 11. This year, he has 5 playing on the Penguins' top power play unit. Now, Rickard Rakell was an all-star level player when he was scoring 30 goals per season. That was back in the 2017, 2018 seasons, but his production did drop off a bit since those seasons, and he's had some injury issues as well. So you could see how the Penguins, who have a lot of contracts that they can't move, might be willing to trade Rakell because he's had this resurgence in his career. Now, Rakell is under contract for 3 more seasons. He makes $5 million per year. He does have an 8-team no-trade list, so he does have a little bit of a say into where he goes. Of course, he could also just waive his no-trade clause if he wants to go. However, I'm guessing that playing alongside Sidney Crosby has helped his numbers, and he would probably like to stay in Pittsburgh and play alongside a player like Sidney Crosby who can help his numbers and theoretically down the line maybe help him get paid more. So when you compare Rickard Rakell to the 2 other players that we've talked about, Brock Boeser and Kyle Palmieri, Rakell's 4 years older than Boeser. He's also 3 years younger than Palmieri. Rakell makes about the same amount of money as the other 2, between $5 and $6 million. However, at least for this season, Rakell's production is much higher than the other 2 players. He's got 7 more goals than Brock Boeser, 9 more goals than Kyle Palmieri. Rakell also has 13 more points than Boeser and 11 more than Palmieri. Again, though, he is playing alongside Sidney Crosby, where Boeser and Palmieri are not, and wherever Rickard Rakell ends up going, he's also probably not going to be playing next day to a Sidney Crosby capable type player as well. Rickard Rakell is both potentially more and less attractive than Brock Boeser and Kyle Palmieri. He's more attractive if this season is his level of production going forward. That's a nice addition to a roster. 30-goal scorer making $5 million a year for the next 3 years. If you can do that, that's a good addition. However, if this year is just a spike in his production and he kind of returns to being a 15 to 20 goal scorer, then that's not really a big addition going forward over the next 3 years. So while it seems that Rickard Rakell could be a potential significant addition for this season, what he could add going forward beyond this season, because he is signed beyond the season, is to be determined. Also, since he's having this big season, you would expect the asking price to be more than Brock Boeser and Kyle Palmieri, as Pittsburgh doesn't have to move him. Again, if he is this type of player playing with Sidney Crosby going forward, then that's a guy that they're not necessarily looking to get rid of. But Pittsburgh is also a team that is likely not going to make the playoffs this year. They've got a lot of aging veteran players, so you can understand why they're looking to get younger for help down the road. So Rickard Rakell probably looking, if he is looking to be traded, I think the Pittsburgh Penguins would be looking for probably both a high-level prospect and a number 1 draft pick. So the asking price for Rickard Rakell might be a little bit too rich for the Kings' blood. We shall see. But he is a player that, again, could really help the LA Kings this year, is having a great year, and could be available at the trade deadline. Real quick, I also stumbled across an article I saw recently from friend of the show, Carl Balikian from the Hockey News, who covers the Kings. He had passed along a link to a story from Frank Cervelli, who is a fairly well-respected NHL insider who works for the Daily Faceoff. And Frank Cervelli claims that the LA Kings are looking for a left shot defenseman. Why he thinks that, I'm not sure. The only way that might be the case is if the injury to Mikey Anderson was more significant than we're being led to believe. However, Frank Cervelli posted that opinion and that article before Mikey Anderson got hurt, so that doesn't seem to follow there. The Kings, I think, actually look pretty set on the left side defensively. Potentially, they've got Mikey Anderson, Vladislav Gavrikov, and Joel Edmondson, and then you've got Jacob Moverar as the extra defender. Now, if, as Kings president Luc Robitaille indicated in the lunch with Luke that I went to, that maybe the Kings are going to keep Mikey and Gavrikov together on that top pairing and move Drew Doughty down to the second pairing, then you'd have Mikey Anderson on the top pairing, Joel Edmondson on the second pairing, and Jacob Moverar on the third pairing, where he's been recently anyway. So I don't know that that's a significant drop off. Maybe the Kings could look for a bit of an upgrade over Movarara, who has no playoff experience. But again, the Kings' issues seem to clearly be in the scoring department. And again, if possible, a right shot, right winger. So we'll see. I thought that was an interesting opinion. I don't see that in any way being a priority for the Kings, but an interesting article that was put out there that I thought I would share and pass along. All right. If you are an everydayer, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to have something that we've tried a bit before in the past, and that is a Kings random fan interview. We're going to have a chat with listener and supporter of the show, Gary, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That might sound familiar with you if you are a fan of our Kings fan feedback shows. Gary is a frequent emailer to the show, and he is a longtime passionate Kings fan from way back in the forum days with the old purple and gold, which I'm wearing if you're watching on the YouTube channel. So looking forward to giving a true Kings fan a chance to chime in and tell us what he thinks about this year's team, and also find a little bit about his story of how he became a Kings fan and maybe share some old stories from back in the day as well. Looking forward to that. Hope you are too. If you want to get in on our fan feedback show, or you want to send an email for any reason whatsoever, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to post your comments in the comment section, we welcome that as well, and we appreciate that. And if you want to stay connected with the show on X, Twitter, and Instagram, we are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings go.